mistake. It often happens that when I pick these topics, maybe because I'm opposed to topics in general, but that by the time they come around, even though it's just a couple weeks in advance, they have a meaning that they didn't seem to have when I picked them. And but before I get to that, I want to talk a little bit about causes. And causes in a philosophical sense, just a sort of. If something causes something, it will cause it each and every time it happens. In other words, when most of us learned or had siblings that learned or parents that demonstrated for us that if you put your hand on a hot burner, it burns you. It will burn you every time you put your hand on there, even though it takes some kids more than once to figure that out. The heat causes the burn, absolutely. Now there's other things that, from a philosophical perspective, people like to argue don't really cause things because they don't cause them every time. And I once heard this discussion about whether or not smoking causes lung cancer because some people smoke and don't develop lung cancer. And I would say that there may be some value in that discussion because it probably also has to do with a certain predisposition to developing cancer and some other things. So in that case, there's more than one thing that causes it. And we, human beings, don't like things with multiple causes because we can't control them. It's real easy to not be burned by a stove. You just keep your hand off of it while it's on. Other things, like that smoking and lung cancer connection, aren't so clear. And we tend to like our world in neat little packages. And so I say all that because we come to this whole thing about people and/or gods, big G, small g, both maybe, who seem to be able to do things that the rest of us can't do. And one of the ones that really sort of fascinates me is this seeming ability to be in two places at once. And one of the people who has been able to do that on the Christian side of the occasion in recent memory was Padre Pio, who was a Roman Catholic priest in Italy, who was seen by supposedly verifiable sources to be in two different towns at the same time. I can't explain it. I would ask some questions like, was he physically in two places at once? Was there some way that he was spiritually able to be in two places at once? Back when I served my first church in Waukesha, they told me of the time they had a Jain monk come to talk to them. And I don't know if you know much about Jains, but they would look sort of like a Buddhist or a Hindu monk. They wear the robes and everything, but they are very, very preoccupied with the fact that they might accidentally kill something, even a bug. And so they wear these little masks that look sort of like a surgical mask that you cut the bottom string off of, that hangs down so that while they're walking along they don't accidentally, swallow a fly or something smaller. Yeah, and they won't walk across the lawn because there's bugs in the lawn. They walk on the sidewalk. There's ants, but you can see them. And they do walk down. And supposedly, I don't know where they found this guy, but he came to talk to them, and 1 minute he was standing next to this table, and the next second he was sitting on it, cross-legged, and nobody saw him go from standing next to it to sitting on it.
Clark Kent.
Clark Kent, yeah.
My cat can
There, your cat can do that? Maybe he was part cat.
I mean, 1 minute he's there, the next minute he's over there.
See? And if it wouldn't have been that there were people whose judgment I trusted, there. There are some people whose judgment I would think, but there were some people there who I absolutely trusted. And I knew they hadn't been drinking or anything. So what exactly happened? Did he levitate onto that table? I don't know. Maybe. If he did, how did he do it? I don't know. And to some extent, I want to say I don't care. Because I think we can get all wrapped up in trying to figure out, okay, how did this guy do it? And miss the point of that he did it, although in this case, I'm not quite sure what the point was. There are other times we hear about things that seem to be miraculous. There are a lot of Hindu teachers who, because there's a big food offering tradition in there, you offer food and it's given back, who supposedly can like throw food to anybody sitting anywhere in front of them. But having back in the day done a bargain express route, which is a pretty monotonous sort of thing, when you're delivering 800 of those papers onto porches, you get pretty good at throwing them to porches from different angles and different positions and always hitting the porch. So that one doesn't strike me as so miraculous, yeah. I mean, practice makes perfect. Now show me a 2-year-old that can do it, maybe we can talk. And then we get to these stories in the Bible that, and there's stories in other religions too, where now we're not talking so much about, do I develop the ability to do something that's pretty unusual, but is just confined to me, so I can levitate up onto the table. Now all of a sudden we're controlling nature, supposedly. And people who feel compelled to get to the bottom of it want to make explanations. We were talking just before we started about the scientific method intersecting with spirituality and leading to literalism. The scientific method wants to look at Jesus in the boat, calming the storms, and wants to say, oh no, they just felt reassured because he was there. And you know, okay, well maybe, but maybe not. I mean, if the Jane can levitate up onto the table, who am I to say? But our discomfort lies in that it isn't neat and tidy anymore. And because it isn't neat and tidy, we can't reproduce it. So now we get into a world of hurts in our own lives. We get into a mess. And we're wishing somebody would just show up and wave their arm and fix it. And nobody seems to come around the corner and wave their arm and fix it. And we think, well, why can't we get to the bottom of what happens? And so what I want to say is we tend to come up with explanations that we're happy with, that allow us to believe that everything's going to be okay and safe all the time, but have little or no basis in reality. And a perfect example of that, unfortunately, is Dylan Roof in South Carolina. Because somebody becomes a mass murderer. I think 9 people qualifies. And what I've noticed is this need to develop a one reason explanation. And if you look at people who are doing this in social media, the one reason is usually whatever their field of expertise is, right? So the social worker is saying it's a mental health issue. And the person who's trying to do racism reduction says it was because he was a racist. And then this morning it came out that he had access to narcotics. So the drug addiction folks are saying it was the drugs. And we like those explanations when the truth probably is it was a little bit of all of that and some other things we can't quite figure out. The reason that makes us uncomfortable is that we can't just change one thing and fix it. You know, if Grandpa gets lung cancer from smoking and Uncle Fred doesn't, we don't like it because we can't just eliminate smoking and take away the possibility that somebody's going to get cancer. We have to live in that discomfort and that tension and not being able to control it and fix it. And we hate that. And that's normal. I mean, I'm not knocking that. That's the way we work. But then the question still persists, how do we get through life struggles? And I think it's good and fair and normal to look for an answer, because sometimes there is one. Sometimes you might sit there and go, gee, if I just take my hand off the stove, I bet that's going to feel better, right? But what about when it's not? What about when all we can learn to do is live with it as it is, and perhaps hold on to the truth that everything changes all the time? And so what can seem really messy will either get cleaned up or get messier. You know, like that. But it probably won't stay the same. Somebody gets sick. If it's us or somebody close to us, we're either going to get better or we're going to get more sick. But that's true at each step along the way. So if I'm pretty sick today and I get more sick tomorrow and I end up in the hospital, they might do something that turns it around, but then I go home and I'm fine. That living in between is so hard, but it's where life is experienced. I have the habit of getting ugly funerals. And, you know, I have the habit of not getting the funeral of, once I got the funeral of Grandma, who lived a long time and everybody loved her. And she died of natural causes late in her 80s, and everybody gathered to celebrate her life. Once I got that. It's children, one-day-old babies, you know, teenagers who rolled their car. And what everybody wants, naturally, is take my pain away. But I'm convinced the only way to take your pain away would be for me to be able to come up and take away the memory of that person. Because I can't change that they died. I can't change that they died when they think they shouldn't have. They died young. I can't change the tragic situation. The only way to make it go away is find a way to make you forget. And for me, anyway, in my life, that wouldn't be a fair price to pay. Because the living of the life, the living of life, rather, is when we make ourselves vulnerable by being open to others. And the downside of that is we take the risk of getting hurt. Because there's, you know, they say the only sure things are death and taxes. Unless you're a politician and then taxes, maybe not. But the truth is, every relationship we have is going to end. Whether it's because one of us or both of us dies, or because one or both of us goes our different ways. We can live in fear of that outcome and never experience the relationship. Or we can experience the relationship and look at the loss as a tribute to how important it was to us. We can look at the difficult times in our life as a tribute to how important life is to us. We can look at the tragedies like white supremacist mass murders in South Carolina. I'm saying white supremacists in South Carolina in the same sentence may be redundant, but take down the flag. But maybe that's what we need to jolt us into really working to change something. Instead of all these little band-aids, all these one-solution explanations, all these things that give us the illusion of control over something that right now we don't have control over. We can only control bits and pieces. Just like we don't recover from an illness in one league, unless it wasn't very serious. We don't recover from a social illness in one league. We don't recover from our hatreds and our prejudices and our biases and the fears that underlie all of them in one league. But that struggle is where life occurs. That struggle is where relationship occurs. That struggle is where love takes place. And I believe love is where God is found. So, when somebody says to me, where was God in this terrible, horrible event? I look at, and I don't know whether it's true or not, allegedly, this kid said he almost didn't do it because of how much love he felt coming from those people in that Bible study and how much acceptance he felt. So if you want to know where God was, the answer is God was in the victims. And if you want to know what we need to do to change it, and you need a one-source answer, the answer is love. Amen.